All right, inference. You guys need to write down the definition of inference. And we're going to talk about some more problems when you sample or do a survey. Some more things that can go wrong. Besides, what are the two things we already talked about that can go wrong? Like how to sample badly. Do you guys remember? Voluntary response and convenience sample. Okay. So anyways, what is inference? It's the process of drawing conclusions about a population on the basis of sample data. So we want to take a bunch of samples, or even if you take one sample of 100 people, whatever it is, and then you want to make some sort of conclusion, maybe based on the whole school, even though you only surveyed 100 people. Okay? So that is called inference. Wow. All right, so how much do our sample results vary? Suppose that 70% of the students in a large university attended all their classes last week. Imagine taking a simple random sample of 100 students and recording the proportion of students in the sample who went to class every class last week. Would the sample proportion be exactly 0.7? Not necessarily, right? Because you're going to do a different sample every time, so it's going to vary. Would it be close? Probably. And so the following graph shows the results of taking 500 simple random samples. So we did that sample of 100 people 500 times. And then we put a little dot for what proportion of those 100 people said they went to every class last week. All right? And so in the center is that true 70%. All right? And then some of our samples of 100 people only had like 56% that went to class, but some of our samples had all the way up to 83% or whatever that is, okay? So this is the true proportion, this 70%, but every tiny little sample of 100 people varies a little bit, right? So we want to take as many samples as we can to get it as close to the true proportion as possible. And also the distance from here out to here is called the margin of error, which we will do more with this later. So we can be off from the true proportion by as much as 15%, okay, in one sample. That's why we want to take a lot of samples. One point that is worth making now. Larger random samples give better information about the population than smaller samples. And you should probably write that down. So if we change n, the number of people that we surveyed, to 400 instead of 100. All right, so a larger random sample is going to give us better information than a smaller random sample. So what happens to our picture here? It is not as spread out. Now we're only like maybe 0.06 away, like 6% away on either end. So notice this dot, the furthest one over, is like 0.75, and before we were all the way over to 0.85 almost. So there's less variation when you have 400 people than if you have 100 people, which makes sense, okay? If I'm only sampling one person, there could be a ton of variation. You could have that one person that never went to class, okay? But if I take 400 and average those, that's going to give us a lot closer to the true proportion. All right, so some more things that can go wrong besides a voluntary response sample and a convenience sample. Here are some other things that can happen. One of them is called undercoverage, and you should write this definition down. So sampling is often done using a list of individuals in the population. So maybe I open the phone book up, and I'm going to like randomly call people, okay, and ask them some question. What happens if I open the phone book? I might leave some people out, like people who don't own phones, like home phones, right? Or people who are in jail. or the homeless, all right? So you're leaving out groups of people. This is called undercoverage. What did you say, Cody? And probably a lot, yes. I agree with that. So again, if you're calling landlines, you're going to leave everyone out who doesn't have a cell phone. Anyways, that's called undercoverage. So that's on the person who's conducting the survey. That's their fault, undercoverage. Non-response comes on the other end. So non-response is when the person can't be contacted or refuses to participate. So maybe they answer their phone and they're one of those people that's like, I don't want to talk to you. Goodbye. Probably a lot of those, right? What? Maybe. Or maybe you ask them at school and they're like, I don't want to participate in that. All right? That is non-response. So non-response can occur only after a sample has been selected. In other words, I'm choosing 100 people at Devlin, but like 2 or 3 of them don't ever respond. Okay? In a voluntary response sample, every individual has opted to take part, so there won't be any non-response. So don't forget about that. Voluntary response sample, when everybody's calling in on American Idol or whatever, there's no such thing as non-response in that because it's already those people are calling in and choosing themselves, okay? Those don't go together. Non-response is when you pick 100 people and some of them don't respond. All right, another type of non-sampling problem occurs when people give inaccurate answers. So people might lie about their age, their income, or their drug use. They may misremember how many hours they spent on the internet last week, or they might make up an answer to a question they don't understand. All right, so make sure, basically this is called response bias. When people give inaccurate answers. So they may be lying, or they may not know that they're lying, all right? But either way, it's response bias. I feel like a good one is definitely if you're asking about drug use or something someone may not want to answer. Another type of problem you could have is the wording of the question. So the wording of the question can actually influence the response. For example, how do Americans feel about illegal immigrants? Should illegal immigrants be prosecuted and deported for being in the U.S. illegally, or shouldn't they? Asked this question in an opinion poll. 69% favored deportation, but when the very same sample was asked whether illegal immigrants who have worked in the United States for 2 years, so this time they said they've worked in the U.S. for 2 years, should be given a chance to keep their jobs and eventually apply for legal status, 62% said that they should. So one's phrased in a more positive light than the other one, right? So different questions give quite different impressions on attitudes toward illegal immigrants. So wording of the question you should write down as another possible factor that will influence the response. Okay? And I feel like wording of the question explains itself, but I would write that down. And another thing that can influence it would be the order of the questions. So ask a sample of college students these 2 questions. How happy are you with your life in general? Answers on a scale of 1 to 5. And then the question, how many dates did you have last month? There's no association between these responses to the 2 questions, but when they switched the order, people answered less happy after they thought about how many dates they had last month. So that's crazy. But anyways, so the order of the questions matter when you're doing a sample survey. Okay, so let's see if we can answer what kind of bias results from each of these. Each of the following is a possible source of bias in a sample survey. Name the type of bias that could result. The sample is chosen at random from a telephone directory. Under coverage. You're going to leave out those lovely people. All right. And, oh, there you go. Some people cannot be contacted in 5 calls. Non-response. They're choosing not to answer. Just showed you the answer to that one. All right. Interviewers choose people walking by on the sidewalk to interview. What do you guys think? Under coverage. What's the other one I heard? It is actually under coverage. What about the people in jail?
Specifically because of the people.
Yeah. It's ridiculous. That's true too. You're only getting people that live in one area. All right. That's true. All right. A survey paid for by makers of disposable diapers found that 84% of the sample opposed banning disposable diapers. Here's the actual question. It is estimated that disposable diapers account for less than 2% of the trash in today's landfills. In contrast, beverage containers, third-class mail, and yard waste are estimated to account for about 21% of the trash in landfills. Given this, so they gave you some background there, in your opinion, is it fair to ban disposable diapers? So what's wrong with this one, you guys? Wording of the question is influencing your response, right? They're giving you this information to make you think, well, 2% is really not that big of a deal versus all this other stuff we put in the trash. So there you go. Okay, so wording of the question would be a problem, and you'd want to word it more fairly. That's it.